Thank you, Zhi Hui, for joining us today for the Hear From Her podcast. I would like to ask you, because I heard from your very interesting journey, previously you were looking at the COVID pandemic, right in the thick of things, and now you're looking at sustainability for MTI. Would you like to share a little bit about your thoughts?
Well, both are exciting journeys in and of themselves. For the pandemic, it was really a policy making and implementation time compressed to the shortest time possible. I think for sustainability, something that you're working towards the future to sustain the future and keep the future going. Yeah, so that's that different slant that I am enjoying right now.
Well, that's great because you talk about the future. So, Singapore has set a 2050 net zero goal. Can you share with us what are some of the interim steps to get there?
So last year, we raised our national climate target to be net zero by 2050. We actually also committed that we will reduce our emission to 60 million tons CO2 equivalent in 2030. These are quite ambitious targets because at the end of the day, Singapore is a very small country. We have very limited resources and we have very limited renewable energy on our own. So to commit to these targets, I think there are lots of things that we have to figure out and have to do to support businesses, the community, the people to get there together.
So there is this balance that we need to strike, between transitioning to a lower carbon world and yet promoting and sustaining economic growth. So you mentioned Singapore is a very small economy. We have no natural resources. So how do we balance growth goals and also our sustainability goals?
At the end of the day, to get to net zero, economy needs to transform. A low carbon economy, in my mind, can be a very vibrant and thriving one. I don't think there's necessarily a zero-sum game between economy as well as sustainability. But the key is we need to take steps to see sustainability as our competitive advantage. Consumers are demanding more green products and services. There are actually a lot of green growth opportunities, whether it's in carbon services, even for power plants looking at renewable energy, sustainable energy systems. It's really about how we seize the opportunities. But I think one big challenge is how we pace this transition. Yeah, it's how we get there and to make sure that we get there in a systematic, orderly fashion, right? We don't want major disruptions and also to bring everyone along. For instance, businesses actually, they move very fast, but they can't transform their strategies overnight. They will also need technologies which will help them decarbonize, and these technologies many are still in development phase. So the time is needed. Businesses aside, even workers, they need time to reskill, to upskill, so that actually they are taking on new jobs or transform jobs in the green economy.
So in the overall scheme of things, how would you say Singapore policymakers is trying to strike a balance? Because you talk about businesses and workers and technologies that have not fully matured yet.
Yeah.
So as a country, how do we strike a balance between all these different stakeholders?
Fundamentally, in my mind, it's maintaining a good, healthy tension, right? On one hand, you know that you want to get to the end point, but you can't push the change too fast. So how do you keep playing this balancing act to say, okay, there are the incentives, the right incentives, the right support for businesses, for workers, for community to change their practices, to change their operations, their strategies. But on the other hand, to say, okay, I recognize that change needs effort, needs time, needs resources. So government can come in with some support, whether it's in funding or whether it's in helping to invest in technology developments or giving time for the transition. So that's the healthy balance that we always have to strike. I think at the end of the day, as a government, we also need to strike the consideration of fiscal constraints. All change will require resources, including fiscal resources. Because government, we are very prudent with our resources. So we also need to make sure that our financial resources are optimized, well used, put to where is cost effective, cost efficient, and put to where there's most impact. So I think then it's about, in our strategy, looking at how to work with businesses to partner such that everyone throws in their weight, puts in their part. We can look at what are some of the training programs upcoming that we need to put down because of the new jobs that are coming up. We also need workers to join us, come on board, adapt, reskill, retool to take on some of these new roles, which actually will be very exciting in the green economy.
So you talked about these new roles that will come up, the jobs, opportunities that are there. Maybe we can zoom in a little bit on what you mentioned earlier about emissions. So we have growth targets on one hand, emission targets on the other hand. How is Singapore going to balance between these two objectives, given that we do also have fiscal constraints?
It's a something that keeps all the agencies in heated discussions all the time. So we have committed that the revenue that we collect from our carbon tax will all be channeled purposefully into helping industry decarbonize, helping us move towards a green economy. There is a basket of money. It's doing the considerations, the cost-benefit analysis of where then we can put the pockets of money. So for instance, in our research funding strategy, I think it's also keeping in touch with international developments, with what other countries are doing, collaborating where there is a way so that as an international community pool our resources together. Industry is also on board, so industry also puts in their resources. So Fundament is about, with this pot of money, what is the best cost-benefit analysis to put to where it will most move the needle.
With this upcoming increase in the carbon tax, there is some concern that businesses may move elsewhere. So you talked about this pot of money that is going to be churned back to try and help industries manage the transition. Has there been any feedback or pushback from companies so far?
I think by and large, actually, businesses recognize that there's a need to take action on climate change. The feedback is they will need time and they'll need practical ways to help themselves move to decarbonize. So at the end of the day, if technologies are not there, there's also little that they can do. Also, some of the technologies, because they are very nascent, they are not commercially viable right now.
So what are the measures that Singapore has in place to help companies adjust? And is there any concern that we may actually lose some competitiveness in the process?
In supporting the businesses, there are funds and support there, whether it's on improving their energy efficiency or looking at equipment setup that will allow them to decarbonize. So when Singapore, actually, we are one of the countries in our region with a carbon tax, there is a question on competitiveness as the companies located here have to compete outside, where it would be cheaper if the carbon tax is not there or much lower. For that, we have introduced a transitionary framework, essentially for companies who are carbon tax liable and who operate in the emissions-intensive trade-exposed sectors. We provide them with transitory allowances for a portion of their emissions. This means that they pay effective lower carbon tax. But the objective here is to A, allow them to manage competitiveness, B, also give them time to invest in their operations in the technologies. But we are also very careful, because linking back to the idea of a healthy tension, right? To make sure that these allowances are not free passes. It's for a portion of the emissions only.
Okay. And
that's one.
I presume they come with an expiry date?
Yes, it's transitionary, it's temporary for sure. In determining the amount of allowances, we also look at things like international efficiency benchmarks. We also look at their decarbonization plans, if the benchmarks are not available, to see how are they moving along. I think we also, are very cognizant, and we look internationally, what's the developments on how companies are doing on technology developments, because then these are really the practical ways that companies can do it. Yeah, so all in all, these transitionary allowances really is to support these businesses to transit and in a very orderly fashion, in a planned fashion with certainty. And that's the main point of why we had announced our carbon tax earlier. There is clear certainty, they know how to plan ahead. Therefore, then the economic disruptions will not be there.
Okay. So the industry consultations have been done prior to the announcement and everything is going according to plan?
Yes, in fact, actually, we spent a lot of time meeting the companies to explain to them the carbon tax. Right now, actually, we are in the midst of the consultation on this transitionary framework, discuss how we could design the allowances such that it also makes sense for them. And then to also explain some of our principles and thinking. So at the end of the day, it's we don't want it to be seen as a free pass, because then that defeats the whole purpose of all the measures we have done. So it really should be a tool that supports the industry.
Okay, so a very customized approach, company by company.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So another way in which we hope to support businesses on their innovative green ideas. Actually, businesses are very good at innovating and creating new products, new services to allow economy to green. So what we have done is we've set up a green economy regulatory initiative. And this is a place where actually businesses can submit their green proposals, their ideas, and then work with government to look at testing out their ideas in regulatory sandboxes with expedited timelines. So hopefully then that will allow us to trial new ideas and support businesses in this innovation process.
So Singapore seems to be playing this regional leadership role on sustainability. Are we able to export some of these capabilities?
Yeah, of course, definitely. In fact, one of my portfolios looks at green economic opportunities. So for a lot of the work that we are doing to help ourselves green, actually we also ask ourselves, how can we export them? And the motivation for doing so stems from also supporting outside of Singapore, our region, the international community. There's also the benefits of economic growth and good jobs for our locals. For instance, Ministry of Transport, LTA, looks into EVs and the whole charging infrastructure. Actually, a lot of these services in thinking of how to do the urban planning for your charging, what are the safety standards and requirements, all these are actually skills and expertise and experience that can be exported as other countries around us also want to green their transport infrastructure. We are also quite deliberate in then seeing how we can grow our local companies who are providing these services such that they then can play in the larger market. So that's one example of how we look at that. We are also working to develop our carbon services because at the end of the day, everyone needs to start measuring carbon, needs to think about what are their sustainability strategies. So it's also trying to grow our carbon services and trading hub in Singapore. And then actually with that, we then have the experience and the resources to also then go out into the region to support similar efforts.
So it sounds like we can kill two birds with one stone, right?
Yes,
we basically grow the Singapore economy, our companies and new capabilities, and on the other hand, we also move the domestic and regional agenda on sustainability.
Correct, that's right. And that's why I think it's not a zero-sum game, really, as long as we do planning and we take the opportunities.
One final question. Apart from the existing roadmap of measures, the carbon tax increase, the energy efficiency gains, hydrogen strategy, what are some of the other steps you think Singapore can do more on in order to get to where we want to be?
I think we will continue to need to innovate our policies to make sure they are relevant and they help move the needle and are effective. So I think that's a continual process. I do hope that while there are the government policies, the government measures, at some point we gain a momentum of a mindset shift. I think this requires quite concerted effort. So beyond the government measures, really businesses, individuals, communities coming together, demanding or preferring green premium goods, businesses knowing that it's time to actually invest in green sustainable plans, invest in my workers to train them up for this wave that is to come. I think about it, our region is slower relative to maybe, for example, our European counterparts on this green mindset, this green growth mindset, on really taking action within our own spheres, whether it's just recycling, and knowing that there's a certain green premium in the interim that we have to pay. There's much that we can do to close the gap on a mindset and cultural shift, which is quite important and requires concerted effort. Yeah, so that's one. The other one is really on the international community and partnership. Because Singapore being so small, climate change action is not something that we can do on our own. Like earlier, we talked about how there's the risk of carbon leakage. When companies find that it's not competitive to operate in Singapore, they choose to relocate to another country where they have more lax environment requirements, and they end up polluting more. That is a lose-lose situation. So actually, it's important then, as an international community, everyone levels up to work on this together, so that actually you fundamentally stem the issue of carbon leakage. We provide the best environment then for businesses to move ahead. Because we are small, alone, we can't do our own. Actually, the collaboration with partners on technologies, on renewable energy is critical and important. And I think that will also then be important in moving the needle. So besides a lot of my work, which looks at within Singapore, how do we decarbonize, how do we grow our economy, my team and I, and with other colleagues, we also participate a lot in the international space, and also a lot of bilateral, multilateral discussions on how we can move this together, because this is something that not any country can do it alone.
But I think the journey has probably started. I mean, you talk about mindset shifts. I mean, I can say that as a consumer, I already see some of that mindset shift. You know, Singaporeans are already adjusting to, you know, more recycling, using less plastic, and even paying for plastic bags at supermarkets, etc. As it cascades up, the households can put also some pressure on the governments to do likewise.
Yes, it has. And then we need to quicken our pace if we can.
Yes, so definitely. Thank you, Zhi Hui, for sharing all these insights with us.